So we're going to cast our minds back to the days of yesteryear, and we're going to mainly focus on the events of spring of 1987. And I remember this.
This is right here in Missouri.
We're going to talk about our memories here. I think Eric can probably, I don't know that you would have been nearly so close to some of these stories as I was, but I mean, some of this almost literally happened in my backyard at the time. But this was the single largest manhunt in Missouri at its time. Now, there's been a larger manhunt since then, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But that is the search for the fugitive known as John David Brown. Again, this is spring of 1987. I was a little kid, and I remember I've got some anecdotes that my wife thought were quite humorous when I started talking about them with her. So, again, we're going to talk about the John David Brown manhunt.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Well, first off, let me kind of dive in. I was a junior in high school when all this took place.
10 years old.
We're showing our age difference
I
here.
wasn't even 10 yet.
Just about 2 years prior, Sylvester Stallone was immortalized as Rambo, First Blood.
And is that when First Blood happened? Okay.
Legitimate.
The best Rambo movie, honestly.
Honestly, yeah. Although the very last one, I got to give some thumbs up to.
I don't think I've seen any since 3.
Yeah. You could skip the ones in the middle, but the last one was kind of cool because it plays old man Rambo. But anyway. Literally, I remember the following year was going to be our senior year. We're sitting around in the cafeteria. We're talking about this John David Brown, this crazy survivalist that's on this massive manhunt. He's shot cops. He's robbed stores. He's burglarized. We were relating it, at least at our teenage level. We have Rambo here in Missouri that's hiding out just like the big manhunt in the movie First Blood. And that's how we associated it.
Well, even me, I was 10 years old, and I can't say I remember those years the best that I could. That was almost 30 years ago at this point. I know. That was almost 40 years ago.
Yeah.
See, you when you get old, you lose track of time.
You lose track of time.
Yeah, that was almost 40 years now. And, it got romanticized. I mean, we didn't realize it at the time, but this guy was a fugitive. He had killed people.
The fear was running rampant. I mean, like our parents, I'll say this, back then, we didn't lock our doors at night. We did during this.
Yeah. No, we romanticized it. I was thinking Robin Hood this morning. I thought, no, that's not exactly right. We weren't thinking that he was heroic in any way, I don't think. But as we go through this, we get to the appropriate time frame, I'll relate some of my own memories of it. But yeah, we were talking about this guy he's out there in the woods surviving.
Yeah.
He's just getting by. Even as 10-year-old kids, we were thought that was something. Well, and again, I had probably seen Rambo, which I probably shouldn't have at 10 years old. But
and I mean, it was everywhere. It was in every newspaper. It was on every local news channel. You could not escape it. I mean, I remember going home for supper, and we were one of those families where, the dining room had a view into the living room with the TV. And I mean, you were just immersed with it, whether you wanted to be or not, and there was the false sightings. And,
he was here and he was there.
Yeah, I think he was in my barn, and, I chased this guy out and I saw some lanterns, and I think that was him. It was just
legendary.
Nuts.
It became like a legendary story. Well, and for you saying that it was everywhere, when we started looking into doing this episode, you couldn't hardly find anything about for us, it was a big part of our life for a while there, for a month.
I'm a YouTuber. I know Bill, he likes Reddit. I'm a YouTuber. I couldn't find a single thing on YouTube.
Well, that was how I learned specifically that we do our research very different ways. Eric apparently looks everything up on YouTube.
I'm a video type person.
I do a Google search and I start reading articles. So I was able to find a lot of articles from the time. And look, I understand everybody's got to make a buck, but there were so many things that were locked behind paywalls that I'm like, I'm not spending money to read research one article that I might not even use any information from if I've already found that info, But again, this was an everyday topic of conversation for probably 2 months when I was growing up. And Eric, you were a little older, so I'm sure you guys probably talked about it in a different way. But yeah, John David Brown is someone that still pops into your brain from time to time as someone from this area.
Yeah.
You remember that.
Now, another thing I will say, in doing the research, and Bill and I were talking, a little bit before we came into the recording studio, I was a little shocked, I guess, because of how far back, and we were saying 40 years now, what I was able to find, and I don't want to throw rocks here, but there was a lot of people that were putting out, trying to kind of attempt to do what we're doing here, like in articles. The dates are way off. I saw one article, and the lady that wrote it was like, yeah, this was in 84. No, it was 86. It was just.
Well, and like I was talking about, the fun part would be you'd find an article and it would be like on Thursday. Well, then I had to okay, when was the article written, and bust out a calendar for 1987 to figure out when Thursday was.
Yep.
I kept a calendar in one tab of my browser, and as I was reading things, I'd be like, okay, that would have been a Saturday, so this was Monday.
So what we're saying is we've worked hard to try to piece together pieces of our childhood to share with you here that were pretty traumatic for the most part.
And a good Missouri story.
A good Missouri story. Yeah.
Again, the original concept was we were going to focus solely on Missouri Ozark
Not a
folklore.
good man by any means, but a good Missouri story. Yes.
And again, I think that's always been the forefront, is we want to tell a good story. And especially stories that we have personal anecdotes about. And Eric and I will absolutely be able to point out at times, like I said, there are things that we're going to talk about, places I have been. I remember things.
And
as we get to different parts of it, I'm definitely going to relate my experience with this. So, like we said, this was the largest manhunt in Missouri up until that point in time. Hundreds of police officers over the span of nearly a month, I think.
FBI,
National Guard. I mean, basically everybody
volunteers,
you could think of.
Yeah.
But this all sort of starts with Brown, who was already incarcerated for, what was it, some robbery, I think?
He had a long run of armed robberies, and also when they busted him for having explosives.
Yeah.
So here we're kind of setting that whole, to us, Rambo status.
Well, yeah, and again, a lot of people labeled him as a survivalist type. He could get by with his knowledge in the woods. And so, again, it kind of got romanticized in that way. But
he was serving a 4-year sentence for all this.
He was serving time in the Ozark Correctional Center at Fordland when he manages to break out.
Yeah.
In June of 1984.
June 1st, actually.
And after he gets out, I think Eric has a little more detail about that.
Well, yeah, he escaped on June 1st, 1984. He shows up then on the 9th, so a little over a week and a half, going inside of what's called Shoppers World. It's kind of a department-style store similar to a Walmart. I had to do a little research because I honestly, for being around Missouri, I was not familiar with Shoppers World.
But I can't say I'd heard of it.
But apparently they've been around since the 1930s. They're especially known for upper end clothing, but also fishing, hunting, supplies, all at discount prices. So, while he was here, Brown actually just walks in and he steals several firearms, pistols, rifles, some articles of clothing from the hunting department area, camouflage, this type of stuff. And again, I know this is 40 years back, but I could not find anything where anybody tries, a security tries to stop him. I think he just goes in and gets the stuff and walks out, which was mind boggling to me. So there might be more to that story, but I couldn't find a whole lot on it. Now, that was on July 9th. It was very nonchalant about a date, but they said within a week after that, a man by the name of Richard Brown, now keep in mind this is John David Brown. Well, this man named Richard Brown,
related?
We're not sure. Even if to this day I couldn't find any proof, there was speculation that they were cousins.
Probably wouldn't be too uncommon in this area.
But Brown is a very common name as well.
I've known a lot of Browns over the years.
So, but here's the weird connection. Now, Richard Brown reports John David Brown coming to his home to rob him. He is the owner of that Shopper's World. That's a little bit, to me, more than a coincidence. But as much as a week has passed, but Richard Brown arrives to his home and he finds that it has been broken into. He immediately kind of starts looking around the house. And again, if this guy has Shopper's World, but any Missourian around here has guns, I'm sorry, that's kind of what we're known for. He immediately knows that some of his guns has been stolen and some of his hunting camouflage type camo articles of clothing have been stopped. Well, while he is looking through the house, again, the best of the parts, the pieces of the stories I can put together, John David Brown comes to him with a pistol and just walks up to him and demands any money that he has, which he hands over his wallet, which again, it's not clear stated how much was in it. It said in one article, a reasonable amount of cash. I'm not sure what that means. A reasonable.
Well, it's subjective, so reasonable 40 years ago.
I mean, if the guy owns the shopping department store, I could see where that could easily be a couple $100 maybe, but again, a reasonable amount. He believes he recognizes the gun that he is having pointed at his face as one of the ones stolen from his department store. And this guy is wearing some of the newer style clothing that also matches stuff that he stole from the department store. Richard Brown doesn't push back, retaliate, which again, it was almost, it was implied by several people that this was a cousin possibly helping him to elude the cops after he had broken out of prison. Some was like, no, you're reading way too much into this. He just followed that guy home and, whatever. He takes Richard's wallet, which again has the normal amount of cash in it. He has his credit card, his social security card, and his driver's license. Now, this plays a part later on. That's why I'm bringing that up. He goes on. Then in July 22nd, there is a Robert LaBelle that is working what he thinks is going to be a normal day that's quickly interrupted. And from what I understand, Robert LaBelle is working at this motel in the area. And he's just kind of picking up and cleaning, dumping trash cans, this kind of stuff. And from out of nowhere, John David Brown enters the motel and demands money from Robert while again being held at gunpoint. The story here is this is not the same stainless steel Ruger pistol that was stolen and used in the previous robbery. This is a different pistol. So there's that. The assailant is described as wearing a hat, but wearing very similar style camo clothing. That to me was maybe a stretch. They thought early on that maybe this wasn't John David Brown. There's a lot of people around here that wear camo clothing. I mean, it's a hunting
What I found
area.
Doing the research was that there were a lot of crimes that were ascribed at the time to John David Brown, basically the entire time he was on the run, from the time he escaped prison till the time he got caught. And it would be like, I think one story I found was a girl was abducted at gunpoint from a theater, but it was in a location that no one really thought John David Brown was in that area.
Yeah.
And this was during the manhunt phase. And if you had followed his trail, he would not have been in that area. So,
well, and again, as we had alluded, when you're watching the TV at night around the supper table, I do remember this almost nightly. Well, we think John David Brown did this.
Yeah.
We think John David Brown was spotted here. We think John David Brown had to do with stealing this truck or these cans of gas, or John David Brown was asleep in this farmer's, there was so much just, let's throw it to the wall and see if it sticks. Yeah. And again, I don't know if that's news media just trying to make a story. I don't know if it was part of the paranoia going on around the Ozarks at that time. But anyhow, there was a time frame when this incident on July 22nd involving Robert LaBelle was thought this might not be him. However, Robert's personal wallet, credit cards, and ID were also stolen. Now, the reason I mention that is when he is captured, both gentlemen's wallets are found in his motel. So that definitely, at the end, we know that was him. So then we have this large gap.
You've got this big period of time after that where Brown just drops off the radar for quite a while.
Like almost 3 years.
So yeah, he just kind of disappears for a long time until he draws attention to himself. on March 30th of 1987. And this is what kind of builds into the manhunt that I won't say we're all familiar with. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have never heard the story, but this is what Eric and I are familiar with. This is what made the news, and this is what we lived through for a while there. So Rolla police officer James Horn and another officer were investigating a report of a stolen car in a motel parking lot. If you're not familiar with Rolla, it's about 45 minutes from where we're at now?
Yeah, right on I-44.
Sort of in a line. Like if you're driving from St. Louis to Springfield, you'd drive through Rolla.
It's a very convenient location.
Yeah. It's, primarily I'd say now it's known for UMR, University of Missouri, which is like Missouri Science and Tech now.
The Highway Patrol has...
they've got a Highway Patrol headquarters there too.
Right there.
And I spent a lot of time in Rolla growing up because we didn't live too far from Rolla. So, and there was a very fine gaming store called Eclipse Game and Hobby that I frequented quite a bit in
I've been there
my
as well.
Teenage years. I love that store. But anyway, Officer James Horn and another officer were investigating this report of a stolen car in a motel parking lot when I guess, this was apparently... I don't know if John David Brown had stolen this car. I don't know if that was ever made clear.
I have a little information on that.
Okay.
Actually, on March 28th, John David Brown checks into this Rolla, Missouri hotel. At the time, it was under the ownership and the name of the Howard Johnson Inn and Suites. Later, this was purchased out by another chain, Best Value Inn and Suites. It is said that he checked in under an alias name of Mill Swentz. Interesting name. Mill Swentz. He was driving, in one article I saw a car, and another one a stolen pickup that had stolen plates, not meaning those plates should have been on that car, but like he stole plates, put them on a stolen truck or car. And he stayed in room 147. And that is when, Bill said that there was a reported stolen vehicle in the parking lot, and that's what brought the cops. From what the stories I could find, they arrive, they find the stolen vehicle, we'll put, whether it be pickup or car. They run the plates, they find out those are stolen, they go check in, they find out that Mill Swentz is who is tied to that vehicle. He is in room 147. The officers go up, is on the upstairs balcony, they knock on the door. John David Brown responds, I guess, politely, quickly, and says, "Oh, just a moment." And then during that little few moments, he bails out the back window, jumps off the upstairs balcony, and then somehow has this 30-30 rifle, which is believed to have been stolen from that Shoppers World department store, and shoots and injures Officer James Horn.
Now, luckily, Horn wouldn't be seriously injured. He would get out of the hospital just a few days later. He didn't, he seriously injure him.
But this is what launches. Yes.
So then John David Brown, he's on the run now, and I won't say it's a full-scale manhunt at this point, but they know they've got a fugitive on the run. He's shot a cop, and, if you know anything from pop culture or law enforcement, if you shoot a cop,
that's not going
to
end good.
So just days later, April 1st, Brown becomes the suspect in the shooting death of a church volunteer named Claude Long, who was 56, in the New Apostolic Church in Doolittle. I guess he was opening church for the evening services that day.
It was a Wednesday night, I believe.
That would be, 2 days after the shooting with Horn.
Well, also, let me say, for those of you who aren't familiar with Missouri as a whole, but in particular the Rolla area.
Well, yeah, Doolittle is just a couple of exits or something. I don't remember exactly.
It's pretty close to Rolla.
It's one of those little tiny blink and you miss it kind of places.
But that whole area and a lot of Missouri has hundreds of thousands of acres of Mark Twain National Forest.
Mark Twain National Forest. And that covers, that covers a huge area.
Long flowing rivers, there's creeks, there's springs, all nestled here in the Missouri Ozarks.
And it's all protected, so it's all wild.
Yes, wild. And we're also known as the Cave State, so there's a lot of good places to hide. And John David Brown, even while he was in prison, was one of those guys that they interviewed some people that was familiar with him in prison. He was always having like survivalist books, and he was one fully enthralled with that lifestyle. And, he said, "I am a survivalist." Well, again, kind of going back to that whole Rambo kind of thing.
Well, the authorities even described him as a self-proclaimed survivalist. That's how they labeled him.
I remember, this is weird that I remember this, but there were jokes going around at this time frame that, "Oh man, did you hear about the highway patrol or the police officer that got his fingers broke?" And we were like, "No," and said, "Oh yeah," said, they were stepped on by John David Brown because he was so well hidden that the cops were down on the ground looking for tracks, and he stepped on their fingers and broke them. And just weird stuff like that, because he was trying to, he did a decent job making a mockery almost of, you can't find me. You're not going to find, I won't be found unless I want to be found. And it was almost like he was, while he wasn't on TV, it was like he was mocking them, like, bring it on. Come at me. You're not going to find me. I'm much better at you.
Well, and like you said, you had the stories of, he was sleeping in so-and-so's bar, and he broke into so-and-so's house while they were gone. He was stealing food. He was stealing supplies. Yep. He was living off the land, and he was sticking it to the man. I mean, we kind of romanticized it. And again, this isn't a guy who was deserving of that by any means.
No. Bad man.
But back to the death of Claude Long.
Claude Long, as Bill said, he was preparing church that evening, a Wednesday night. And I had to dig quite a lot, because my thoughts was, so John David Brown was just kind of like out in this rural wooded area and finds this church and happens to have this guy here. Well, come to find out, he had set up a camp in the nearby woods. And what they now believe was, when Claude Long arrived, John David Brown saw a vehicle potential to be able to steal. So for whatever reason, he went in the church. They did find 2, what was now broken, glasses of what they thought was water. They thought maybe he came in and was acting like he was in distress. And this good-natured man, this 56-year-old retired Army soldier, Claude Long, probably got like 2 glasses of water, maybe even while he had his back towards Brown. He pulls out this same stainless steel revolver, a Ruger, that had been used earlier in the robbery. And we don't know exactly what happened, but Claude Long was found, shot and murdered right there in the church. One of the cops that was out in the neighborhood actually spots what would be Claude Long's stolen vehicle, with John David Brown driving it, speeding out of the driveway. I must not have recognized him, but he thought it was odd enough that he turned and went down the driveway. And he finds the church lights are on. There is no other car there. Long story short, that's how they find the discovery. Well, they start looking around the area, and they find a metal chest that is buried at the campsite. He's got it all camouflaged. He's got like this camouflage netting up around, again, military surplus type stuff. They dig up this chest, and they find an arsenal. They find deer rifles. They find a telescope. They find cans of food. They find matches. They find all this type of stuff that is buried. So apparently, John David Brown had set up camp here for a while. And maybe this is kind of where he had been calling home. And then poor Claude Long on a Wednesday night just happened to come into the church, and poor timing, wrong place, wrong time.
At this point, you have the injured police officer, you have the murdered caretaker, you have, robberies and whatnot attributed to this guy. And again, there's a lot of things going on that people are saying that John David Brown did, that maybe he did, maybe he didn't. People just trying to make a name. So they know this guy's dangerous. He's killed a person now. And so, the manhunt is now officially in full swing.
Full blown.
And so they're bringing in the police, you've got the Highway Patrol, the FBI, the National Guard, and they start searching. Like everywhere, someone says they've seen him, they go.
Door to door, literally.
So over the roughly next month and a half, they're covering ground from Rolla to Waynesville, which is an area, you're talking about 30, 40 miles as far as the interstate goes.
Still pretty close grouping.
Yeah. And always kind of along where that Mark Twain National Forest is at. So, and again, he's this survivalist type. So he's out there living off the land and stealing what he needs to survive.
And you also don't want to forget, Fort Leonard Wood is right up there. Yeah. That's hundreds and hundreds of
acres.
acres.
A lot of untapped
Maybe he could steal some military surplus stuff if he could, sneak in through the backsides and stuff.
So we'll go up a couple of days, and on April 3rd, Brown was suspected of breaking into a rural home just 2 miles west of Rolla. So at this point, he hasn't covered a lot of ground just yet. Now, the intruder was said to have gulped down raw eggs and other food, and then took a blanket and fled into the woods. Later, Treffy Cox, 86, was found bound but uninjured, fortunately, inside the house. And on Sunday, April 5th, about 250 members of law enforcement using bloodhounds and helicopters began to scour the area around Rolla, Missouri. Now, one comment I did see from an officer that was involved was, you got to remember, this is springtime. The trees are all in leaf. So, they've all got their leaves on them. Using the helicopter wasn't the most efficient way of doing the search, and they even commented on that at the time. We're not going to see him if he's in the forest. So
yeah.
But anyway, as they're searching, a couple days later, they find a blanket matching the description of the one that was taken from the Cox house, and it is in the shed. And so they believe that Brown was using this shed for cover, and this is about a half-mile west of that house. So again, he's not covered a lot of ground. He's on foot. He's in the woods. Again, he's a survivalist type, but you're only going to get so far.
And it's not real clear what he did with the church guy's car that he stole either. I mean, maybe he got alerted and just ditched it somewhere. But, if he had a car, why didn't he make a run for it?
But yeah, at this point, Brown had been eluding law enforcement for around 7 days, and police were hoping that the relentless pursuit would wear Brown down. Highway Patrol Lieutenant Ernest McCutcheon at the time said, quote, "Psychologically, it weakens the nervous system and it will defeat you. We hope it gets to him and causes him to make a mistake." And at this point, that's basically what they're hoping for, is that he's going to make a mistake that's going to let them catch him. Because right now, he's eluding the cops left and right.
They don't have much to go on. And again, we've talked about this on some of our other podcasts. The law at the time, again, with the technology that was available at that time, I guarantee those phones are ringing off the hook. You've got limited supply of people. What do you go send people to research? Are they chasing up, an empty tree? What's going on? I mean,
on April 22nd, they call off the manhunt when police run out of leads, and they think they're not going to catch him. He's kind of avoided them. This picks up again on May 9th when Brown is sighted yet again east of the Rolla area when he's seen fleeing a Buckhorn, Missouri restaurant in a stolen car. Now, when I saw this, I'm not going to lie, I got very excited. Buckhorn, Missouri was a very important place in my childhood. So this is when John David Brown's getting close to home for me. Buckhorn, Missouri, I can only imagine the restaurant they're talking about was Whitmore Farms, because there's only one restaurant in Buckhorn, Missouri.
Yep.
And so if you see nostalgic pictures of Missouri from that point in time, it just sort of looked like a big red barn, basically. It's one of those places you would stop. It's got kitschy little stuff for sale, real down-home diner type food.
Kind of a tourist trap kind of thing there for I-44 to catch people.
Yeah,
it's a good restaurant as well.
I don't know. Is it still there?
I don't believe it is.
Well, even if it is, it's definitely not Whitmore Farms anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't tell you how many times I ate at Whitmore Farms growing up. But I'm assuming that's where it was. So now, for me, like, this comes close to home. I know exactly where this is. But yeah, apparently he was seen fleeing the restaurant in a stolen car. Although later he would abandon the car and flee on foot into the woods.
Back to the woods.
Yeah, I mean, and again,
he's a survivalist.
Well, if you drive through that area now, you're not going to see a lot of woods, to be honest. But back then,
they've built a lot of housing.
Yeah, but back then, well, on the Buckhorn side of the interstate, you're driving down I-44. Let's say you're driving down I-44 from Lebanon in that direction. Buckhorn, Whitmore Farms restaurant would be on your left as you're going by. On the right, there's all kinds of houses. There's a big gas station. There's all kinds of. None of that was there in 1987. Like, you went across the road, it was forest and some houses along the road, and that's about it. And so, yeah, this guy's got plenty of wild, untamed land to run around in. And again, this is when it came close to home for me, because we were living in Lakeway at the time. I was going to school, Lakeway Elementary School. Well, actually, it was Lakeway School. Everything was all in one building at that point. It was a small town. Lakeway literally has a post office that's probably the size of the room that you and I are sitting in right now. At that point in time, their post office was maybe slightly bigger, but it looked like a post office out of the Wild West.
Now, there in that vicinity, I mean, I'm from Lebanon, where we're at now. Do you remember mentioning of possible curfews that were instated?
Well, again, okay, I'm going to say I was
less younger
than 10 years old. I don't remember curfews, but
to best of my mental ability to remember, I don't think we had a curfew, but there was a lot of discussion that, the next step is we can't find this guy. He has eluded. We believe he is armed, dangerous, and definitely in the area. And it was strongly suggested, but I don't think it was ever implemented. But like I said before, around here, and again, you wouldn't even dream of doing it around here this time in the time of history, but we never locked our door.
No. We did. I don't remember locking our doors.
Windows were left open. I mean, during the spring and summer to catch wind, air. It would have been so easy for anyone to break into houses around
where
here.
We lived. It's an area called Turkey Ridge, and I will say you drive down that road, and it's the same, kind of like I was describing I-44. Now there's houses and stuff all the way down that road, but if you drove down that road, then one side of that was all trees, and then you had houses, and then on the other side of those houses, all trees. my brother and I would go back into those woods and we could stay gone all day and not set foot on the same piece of ground twice.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's just that it was that wild.
That vast.
And just undeveloped.
Now, again, as I had said, doing a lot of the research, some of the dates kind of conflict, but we're going to go with May 11th. This is well after the church murder and all this. He's disappeared. He's went to the Cox residence. He's, chucked down some raw eggs, got some more food out of the cupboard, stole that blanket. That's been found. At approximately 1 a.m., Iva Penda states that his shop had a concrete block thrown through the plate glass window and was being robbed. Now, couldn't find a lot of details on this, but I think it would be more of like the shop is on the same property as his home. He heard the commotion kind of thing.
If I remember Lakeway well enough from the time frame, you would drive up this little road. Lakeway School would be on your left. There was a sort of a little... You would have already passed the post office at this point, and on the right, it's still there. There's this little, almost mini strip mall kind of thing, you would say, but It was just a bunch of little shops, 2 or 3 little shops lined up in a row. I would assume that's where he's talking about, because I don't remember any other places where there would have been shops.
I couldn't find any detail of what kind of shop it even was, but I was almost envisioning
just
like a
general store in my notes.
I was thinking a liquor store, general store. I
didn't
know.
It would have been a general store. I don't remember a liquor store in that area.
Okay. Well, someone, again, at this point in time, we're not sure if it was John David Brown, but throws this large concrete block through the plate glass window, goes inside. This awakens Iva Penda, or at least alerts him. It's approximately 1 a.m. in the morning. As many Missourians comes out armed.
Yeah, he didn't waste no time.
And fires 2 shots directly in Brown's direction. Now, Brown, or whoever at the time we thought it could have been, quickly flees back, and it says goes around the building and disappears into the woods.
Flees into the woods.
Again, I'm envisioning the woods is, right there.
And I have here apparently uninjured. And yeah, if I'm thinking of the right place, you would have had a tree line right behind those buildings.
So, very easy. Now, of course, Iva reports this to the police. The police are thinking, woohoo, we got a new lead, a blip on the radar.
And they are there in minutes.
With an arsenal of dogs to try to track him. FBI, full blown. We're back into the manhunt. The dogs do pick up a scent, but it's like Brown's prepared for it. Again, survivalist mode. He loses the dogs lose the track of him, so they're going around the same tree. They're doubling back. So,
and again, at this point, he's back in the Mark Twain National Forest.
He's back in his safety zone, if you will.
The police are sort of concentrating on a 1 mile square area. Now, during the same time, because that's later, the robbery happened about 1 a.m. when they had him in the woods chasing him. That was about 1 p.m., so that's later the same day. Now, while this is all going on, the FBI come in, the Missouri Highway Patrol, and police from St. Robert and Rolla come in, and they're conducting roadblocks in the area. Now, I was in school, and this is a place where I can speak to my experience personally. The roadblocks were the highlight of our existence. I remember begging my mom to go to Lakeway for things, because Lakeway,
so you could get stopped at the roadblock?
Yeah, we lived in Lakeway, but we weren't in town. So the idea was we would talk mom into going to Lakeway so we could get caught by these roadblocks and have the police search the car, because we just thought that was the coolest thing. But when we were in school, again, you have the school, you have a playground, you have tree line.
Yeah.
And so the teachers we went out for recess, which nowadays seems irresponsible in hindsight. If there was a manhunt going on,
hey, the teachers back in that day may have been packing.
Well, they may have been, but in this day that seems irresponsible. If there was a manhunt going on, we should have been kept inside.
Yes,
but we were allowed to go outside and play, but we couldn't go back by the trees. And then, of course, since we weren't allowed to go back by the trees, you had kids going back by the trees constantly.
Absolutely, that's the first place we're going to go.
And of course, the kids that were too scared to go back by the trees, of course, were just watching for John David Brown to come out of the woods and snatch somebody or whatever he was going to do.
Bad horror film.
Yeah. So, like I said, the roadblocks and all that, we were just fascinated with that. And again, as an adult with kids, my mom was probably terrified of the whole thing.
I remember my parents. It affected, especially. I think what really set this area on, we're in the middle of the Bible Belt, but what set this area on ear was the murder in a church.
Yeah.
And it's that's like sacrilege. How dare anybody do this? So, it was almost like we're hunting the devil.
Oh, yeah. He was
that was
dude.
the vibe.
So like Eric said, John David Brown was leading them on this zigzag path through the Mark Twain National Forest. Eventually, the dogs did lose the scent. And at that point, officers formed a line to sweep through the forest. But ultimately, in Missouri, all efforts to locate John David Brown proved fruitless. This was sort of the end. Now, there may have been other things he was accused of after this, but as far as like 100% saying this was John David Brown, he kind of disappears now after this. And so eventually the manhunt is called off completely. And John David Brown, for all intents and purposes, disappears for about 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. About a month.
When there's a little town in Ada, Oklahoma, and at a local hotel, FBI agents and police officers arrest John David Brown at 3 a.m. on May 28th, 1987, after lawmen surrounded the motel. What's a hotel and a motel? What's the difference? I don't ever remember.
I wondered that.
There is a difference. I just don't remember which.
It's like
a
cemetery and a graveyard kind of thing.
But after lawmen surround the motel and evacuate about half of the occupants, they move in, and there's John David Brown. They arrest him. And he would find himself in the Oklahoma County Jail following his arrest, where he was held in the maximum security section.
Now, I had that they spotted him by leaving his room to go fill up his ice bucket. And so that's when they knew this isn't a possible farce.
Yeah.
This is legit. We have him. This Rain Tree Motel there in Ada, Oklahoma, he had checked in. Apparently, within 260 feet of that was the bowling alley, which played a vital part. 260 feet away, almost from his motel door, he could walk across the parking lot, and there was this bowling alley / restaurant. And from what I could find online, obviously, a lot of bowling alleys have like a little cafe restaurant area, but this one even had a setting area out front, and they would bring your food out to your tables. There was a particular woman by the name of Pat McDonald who was an observer. She waited on customers there, and she'd been there for quite a while, many years. Said on an interview that she had seen a lot of people come and go through that small town, and it seemed like a frequent stop for many travelers. So this motel, while it was a small one, seemed to catch a lot of traffic. It was pretty busy. But she said when she waited on this gentleman, who ended up being John David Brown, he had come over to get a bite to eat. He was sitting outside, and said he just seemed off, was the word that she used. Obviously, she was a pretty good, darn good judge of character.
Well, there was definitely something off about the guy.
Yes, definitely. Now, she stated that as she served him his food out there on the table, just by looking in his eyes, she could tell he was tired, had lack of sleep. And, she served the food. She tried to say some kind words to him, but said he was very paranoid, fidgety, very nervous. And upon her delivering the food, said before she even got back inside, he immediately took that food order and was walking across the parking lot to return to his motel room. Now, she also remembered the condition, oddly, of the man's beard. Now, she's on, like, the news channels and stuff are interviewing her. And she was very adamant about the beard. It was kind of comical at a point, but she goes, yeah, and that guy's beard. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? And said, well, it was just scraggly and untrimmed and unkept. So, that really stood out to her. And she kept bringing up this beard and said, if someone's going to grow a beard, they need to know how to take care of it. I mean, it's just, you could almost kind of this motherly figure.
She's not wrong.
She's not wrong, but the kind of this motherly figure, how dare he have this beard and he doesn't even know how to take care of it.
As a bearded gentleman myself, I will agree.
Yeah, just keeps bringing that up. I thought that was kind of interesting. But then as Bill said that, the FBI agent, police could come in. They spotted him going and filling up his ice bucket, so they knew they had him. Now, when they went into his room, that is when they found the wallets of Richard Brown and also the Rolla motel owner, Robert LaBelle. So then they knew sure
they got him.
He was that guy. They found several rounds of ammo. They found the same stainless steel Ruger pistol that was used to kill the church victim in Missouri. And they also stated that he did have a gunshot wound to the upper part. I heard shoulder and I heard upper thigh. So I found both.
I can only hope that the old man from Lakeway got him at least
That's
once.
what I'm thinking. Because he fired 2 shots.
Yeah.
And he said, I fired it directly at him and he took off running. Well, if you got zipped by a bullet, You may not be running so fast, but you're going to be trying to run fast.
I'd like to hope it was that guy. Just to.
And they did say that they felt it was at least 2 to 3 weeks old. So that would definitely,
the timing's right.
That would be in the time frame.
So yeah, they lock him up in the maximum security section of the Oklahoma County Jail there. And they hold him there to await extradition to Missouri, to the point where I guess they dismissed the charges he was arrested on in Oklahoma, so there wouldn't be any legal complications sending him back to Missouri.
Yeah, Missouri's like, send him back here. We want him.
Yeah, the U.S. Attorney's Office in St. Louis filed a federal complaint of interstate flight on April 3rd, when it was obvious he had slipped through the police dragnet then. And they thought even at that point he may have left the state. So they were ready for that eventuality. And like I said, they dismissed the charges, so there wouldn't be any complications sending him back to Missouri to face justice. And bearded and bespectacled, Brown appeared before the U.S. Magistrate Robin
There's
J.
that beard thing again.
Cuthron, and I hope I said that right, who did allow him to post bail. Yeah, and I guess they said it at like $1 million, and somehow he posted.
Wow.
But they also refused to let him go based on the charges that he was facing in Missouri. So he bonded out of his Oklahoma charges, but that wasn't going to save him from the Missouri ones.
I did find mention, it was a brief mention, couldn't get a lot of details, but said the trial was actually postponed a couple times due to lack of funding by the public defender's office. Thought that was kind of odd. And also the Assistant State Attorney General, Tim Finkel, was really pushing the death sentence towards John David Brown. And the article was Bible-thumping Attorney General is going after the death sentence.
No, he didn't get the death sentence, but he did get life in prison for the murder of Claude Long in October of 1989.
So it's time for headlines. I wanted to just continue to follow suit with tonight's story. I found that there was actually more victims, well, at least one confirmed, that would not be known for some time. So I felt it was fitting to tag a more recent update on this same case file for my headline tonight. There were a couple strange disappearances of young women in particular in the Missouri Rolla area. And let me tell you about Mary Ellen Nobles. At that time, age 26. Now she was actually in Bolivar, Missouri, so that's a little distance away from Rolla. She had went missing back in 1985. The investigation had went cold until the mid-2005. Now, first and foremost, at the time of John David Brown's arrest, there was no known connection to this particular case with Mary Ellen Nobles. Secondly, the time frame in this 1985 niche would have been during the 3-year period where John David Brown had escaped from the Department of Corrections and was on the run. But in mid-2005, the family of Miss Nobles reported that John David Brown, who was confined to the Missouri Department of Corrections on an unrelated murder charge, that would be the church attendant that we talked about in our podcast tonight, was corresponding with the family. And apparently the family reached out to John David Brown while he was there and asked, "Can you please share with us, were you involved with Mrs. Noble's 1985 disappearance?" And he fessed up to it. He said, absolutely. And even went as far as to tell them where he had disposed of her body in a wooded area of Pulaski County, Missouri, which is right adjacent to Laclede County, Missouri, right here, and right again in that same Rolla area.
Yep.
Now, her remains were found in 2006 after her daughter, Becky Castile of Buffalo, Missouri, conducted her own investigation, including a correspondence with the prisoner Brown. She states, "It started out as a missing persons case that was 22 years old. Nobody knew what happened to the lady," King said. Now, King is J.B. King, and he was the sheriff of Pulaski County during that time frame. He actually was directly involved with this disappearance case and sat in on some of the interviews with John David Brown. Now, Brown had pleaded guilty in Pulaski County Circuit Court on this, so there was no trial. It was hammered down, said and done. So that's why a lot of people don't even know about that murder, stated retired Pulaski County Sheriff J.B. King. Now, King, like I said, he was actually assigned to this missing person case at that time, but then when all of this happened with John David Brown, he was involved with that as well. So now he's actually been working on writing a book. He's already authored one book about, I think it was a disappearance or death on Fort Leonard Wood.
Yeah, it was something to do with Fort Leonard Wood. I don't remember the specific.
And then he was working on this possible second book, which I could not find a title on, that he was involved with on a couple incidences. And he was debating on the John David Brown needing to be a standalone or if he might include it as, manhunt type things that he was involved with in Missouri. But I felt that was interesting because, as we had alluded in the podcast, so many things were being thrown up. John David Brown did this. He was spotted here. He did this. He did that. He just totally fessed up to this and told them, go here and you'll find the body. And boom, there was the body. So at least a little bit of closure for that family. But this was a bad man.
Yeah.
Bad man. Bill, what do you got?
So we referenced the fact that the John David Brown manhunt was the largest up until that point. So I wanted to find, which one was more.
Was there a larger manhunt?
Yeah, I wanted to find, the one that took its place. So my headline is from Fox 2 Now by Tony Nguyen, dated November 4th, 2021. The headline is, a 1996 string of Missouri murders led to this America's Most Wanted manhunt. On an October night in 1996, Alice Ben Johns, also known as Joe Johns, which is how he's popularly known, was caught in the middle of a lover's dispute that led to a night of drinking, a confrontation, and a man left dead in the middle of the road. The story goes that Johns was riding in a car with his friend Deborah Tedder when her boyfriend Thomas Stewart began to follow them. Now, apparently, Stewart and Tedder had been fighting all that day, and when Stewart found them on the Pulaski County roadway, Pulaski County again,
here we go,
all three were intoxicated, and the confrontation became violent. At some point, Johns pulled out a .22 pistol and shot Thomas 7 times, killing him right there in the street. After neighbors found Stewart's body, police began searching for the killer, and the next morning they apprehended Tedder, who implied that Johns might have had something to do with Stewart's death. Might have. He shot him 7 times.
7 times. That's pretty direct.
When police arrived at the farm where Johns lived, he was already on the run, and he evaded capture for the next 6 months. During that time, Johns was implicated in 2 murders and several robberies. On February 28, 1997, police found Leonard Voiles dead in his Camden County home, which, again, just 1 county over from where we're at. He had died of a single .22 gunshot wound to the head, and there is a connection there in that Johns had formerly worked for Voiles. A search of the home revealed that Voiles' Ford Ranger truck and his rifle were both missing, so now we know he's armed with a bigger weapon than he was. Investigation in the area uncovered a shoe print on the property that matched Johns' right boot, so they know it was him. Around this time, Johns meets up with his girlfriend, Beverly, and I'm going to say this wrong, so I'm going to say Gruyere, maybe I don't know how to pronounce it. They burglarized several homes together. On March 9th, police found the body of Wilma Bragg. Her house was located in Newton County, and investigation revealed that Bragg's assailant shot her 2 times in the back of the head while she lay face down on her bed with her hands tied behind her back. Now, DNA testing of a cigarette butt found at the scene implicated Johns in that murder, and analysis confirmed the rifle stolen from the Voiles home was the one used to kill Bragg, so he's definitely involved. So, by this point, hundreds of law enforcement officers and the Missouri National Guard are hunting for Johns. Now, the manhunt got national attention as the television shows America's Most Wanted and 48 Hours came to Benton County to film. On April 7th, officers of the Missouri Water Patrol encountered Johns in a Benton County cabin while searching Coal Camp Creek. Joe came out of the cabin with a rifle against Gruyere's head, threatening to kill her. And as John began to make a sudden move to escape, Water Patrolman Eric Gottman shot him in the abdomen and placed him under arrest. That guy's a good shot. I'll give him credit for that.
He got his man.
Yeah.
Gottman.
Gottman. Very good, Eric. I wasn't ready for that. Alice Ben Johns was brought to a hospital in Sedalia until he was well enough to be brought back to Pulaski County, as hundreds of law enforcement officers celebrated the end of the manhunt. On May 22nd, Johns was charged with murder in the first degree and armed criminal action, and at first he was sentenced to death, but would later be determined to be intellectually disabled and therefore not eligible for the death penalty under Missouri law. Beverly Gruyere, for her part, was ordered to serve the maximum sentence of 15 years for the second-degree murder of Wilma Bragg, and she was released from prison in 2014. Eric, what do you remember? I mean, you didn't live in the area. I know you lived here in Lebanon, but, I mean, your impressions like? I know we've talked about it, but, I mean, just really, like, how did this come home for you? Like, how do you remember all this when we think about it? Before you did your research, like when I brought up the name.
Right. This definitely was the largest national-wide story closest to home. I mean, that foremost was, how is this happening right here in my backyard? And to your point, backyard meaning within 50 miles.
Yeah.
I mean, not as close as where you lived. I mean, literally backyard.
Yeah.
But again, and you said it well, it was almost, for us, at least in the Lebanon High School, romanticized because, again, of Rambo First Blood. We literally envisioned this as some Rambo character survivalist. And I don't think to us at our age, it truly dawned on us on how much danger really we were in. To your point earlier about released out on the playground to play and just don't go near the woods, guys.
Yeah.
You know, I think we were still young and dumb and it just didn't register, but it was more of the romanticism about it. Not that we thought he was a good man, but we were totally relating to that Hollywood movie hype just a couple years before. So it was a mixed painted picture.
Well, like I said, we were trying to convince our mom to go drive to the place where the police were actively searching for the guy.
That is funny. I had never thought about that.
Yeah, again, I think it was the same for us. You know, as a little kid at 10 years old, you really don't think about the danger of it. Like, again, our house was right there on the wood line almost. So, I mean, if he was going to be burglarizing houses, I don't think it ever occurred to me that like, oh, he's going to break into my house and steal food from me. But it was, oh, did you hear he broke into this place or he broke into that place or so-and-so saw him by their house or,
Yeah.
It was just schoolyard chatter at that point. I mean, we were literally telling tales out of school at that point. You know what I mean? So again, when I was thinking of John David Brown, when I proposed the idea, the thought running through my head when I first think of it was talking mom into driving through the police checkpoints.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they would make you pop your trunk and they were there with their shotguns. And I mean, they were ready to go. And, to drive to Lakeway, we had to drive through places where you had tree lines on either side of the road. We could easily been hijacked by John David Brown. And,
oh, yeah.
So, I think, as kids, we didn't appreciate the danger. As an adult, if I knew there was an active manhunt going on, I certainly wouldn't take my kids there.
Yeah, let's go drive through and be stopped by the cops, kids.
Yeah, I'd be like,
that'll be fun.
You guys nuts? So, yeah, I mean, this is 40 years old. We were much younger back then. So
now I will say, another one of the podcasts we did was on the Springfield 3 that took place, years after. That was the second national case. And I think I'd reached a little bit, I was married at that time. I'm hoping I reached a level of maturity. That one creeped me out a lot more. I think the danger factor was more real.
Well, and for me and you now, I think the Springfield 3, I was in high school. So to me, it was a strange story, but I never would have been like, oh, I need to worry about the people I care about or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think I was still just a touch too young to think of it that way.
And then, of course, most recently, the whole Cassidy Rainwater case that
now Cassidy Rainwater,
adults obviously with families now,
and knowing that I was within feet of that house on more than one occasion in that time frame.
We both took our children down to that area to swim in the river. I mean, we drove past that area, that house.
That's crazy. And like I said at the time, I said it in the podcast when we recorded it, I did not realize until someone like literally gave me the directions to go, oh man, I was there.
I know where that's at. Yeah, I've been there.
But Eric was kind of ruminating a moment ago about, we've talked a lot about Missouri on our podcast.
We have, and we've had some very villainous, vile things that have occurred in our backyard. I don't want to paint the picture for everybody out there that, Missouri is, not a good place to visit. We have a lot of positive things and good things.
Stuff in Missouri.
And I think that's probably true with everywhere. There's, as they say, skeletons in everybody's closet, and probably every town has its secrets. But just reflection, sitting here with Bill at the table, it's like, we've had a lot of stuff go on in this area in our lifetime.
Wow. And to go back to the very, very roots of all this, the whole podcast endeavor, when we said it was going to be Missouri Ozarks sort of focused, I mean, it's what we know. It's what we grew up with. It's the stories that we heard. And so I think when we pick these things as podcast topics, it helps us a little bit in that we lived through some of it in some respect. Like I said, I could do a lot of personal recollections of things we talked about today. And like you, I mean, it literally was practically my backyard. It was just outside the schoolyard fence, if you will, for me. So it's just easy for us to do these topics because they're so close to
They're
home.
more familiar.
I mean, if we lived in Kansas or whatever, we'd be doing stories about Kansas stuff.
Now, I will be the first to say, with the John David Brown case, not that it wasn't a huge national case, but I quickly learned by trying to do research on it, it's something that's pretty much kind of faded away.
Something that was a big deal in our lives wasn't a big deal to the rest of the world.
I could almost bet you that 95% of our listeners probably had no clue who John David Brown even was.
So my wife moved to Missouri just before we met. I think she'd maybe lived here about a year or so before we met. And when I mentioned it to her that it was one of the episodes we were doing, she always asks, what are you talking about this week?
Mm-hmm.
She never heard of John David Brown. She never heard that story. And, she, like I said, she's lived here for over 20 years. So,
and it's, I don't know, I got mixed emotions on it. I mean, I think it's bad in some ways that it's faded back to almost non-existent, especially for the families that went through and had loved ones lost.
And to be fair, there may still be people who lost people because of him that don't even know it.
Exactly.
And don't have that closure. They just have this missing family member.
But on the flip side of that coin, it's like, I mean, what else can you do? You have to go on.
You got to move on.
You got to move on.
And I mean, he was a despicable person and he did a lot of terrible things and, he paid the price for it. I mean, he was never going to get out of prison. So, and he may have passed since. I don't remember. Like, I didn't even think to look up that detail. So I don't know. But yeah, like you said, I mean, in one way, it's good that we don't remember him. He wasn't any more important than he was, especially on like, a nationwide scale, let's say. It's a good thing that he didn't do enough to get more notoriety.
Yeah.
But for us,
that was big news.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was in our backyard, so it was a big deal to us. Yeah, I remember it being a much bigger story than it was.
Likewise.
Apparently.
I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to say is I thought it would be bigger.
Yeah, I thought there was more. I thought it would be much easier to collect all the information than it was. And again, I filled in a lot of details that I certainly didn't know when I was 9 years old.
And I learned again, as I normally do by doing these podcasts, there's a lot of things that I didn't know or didn't pay attention to at that time frame. So it is what it is. But we hope that all of you listeners out there have enjoyed yet another installment of Nightmares on the Lost Highway. We appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you.
Hey, real quick, call to action. I think Eric would agree. We'd like to grow this. Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Absolutely.
If you could, if you're listening on Apple, if you would go and give us a review and rate us. If you have some feedback, that's fine too. Whatever platform you're listening, follow us, rate us, give us some reviews. That helps get some recognition and gets our name out there.
We do have a Facebook page, Nightmares on the Lost Highway. You can easily find us if you want to communicate with us, if you want to share some possibilities for future podcasts with us, reach out. We want to talk with you guys. So it's time for headlines. And I just wanted to follow suit with...
You got to pause after you say headline. I got to edit in the noise.
So it's time for headline. Let me tell you the case of a Mary Ellen Noble. Be making noise over my stuff, Bill. You have something?
No.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Weird facial.
Freaking out, man.
Freaking out, man.
And the manhunt got national attention as television showed. Man.
Bill, quit drinking. We're recording today.
Yeah. My wife moved to Missouri just after, well, no, that I was going to say just after we met, but that doesn't make sense. I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.